Good afternoon. This is lesson number 35 in our study in the book of Acts. And let me begin reading at Acts chapter 23, verse 23. And it reads as follows. Then he called two of the centurions, that is the tribune did, and said, "Get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the third hour of the night. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix, the governor." And he wrote a letter to this effect. Claudius Lysias, to his excellency the governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen. And desiring to know the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him to Antipatris. And on the next day they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. When they arrived down to Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor and presented Paul before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he was from, and when he learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive." And he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. Now, this is just a little bit of a section that we're going to talk about in our Thursday night time. This is after the Jews were plotting to kill Paul by asking the tribune to have him come back to their council on the following day. And if you recall, the nephew of Paul overheard this and went to Paul and told him, and Paul had him sent to the tribune. And the tribune then decided that Paul should be taken out of Jerusalem quickly because of the plot of the 40-plus Jews who had taken a vow to murder Paul when he was brought down to the council. And so what we see here is that the tribune calls the centurions to him, two of his centurions. Now, if you think about a centurion, he is typically in charge of 100 Roman soldiers, any type of soldiers, but typically 100. That's where the term centurion came from. So he calls two centurions to him, and he says to them, "Get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the third hour of the night." Now that's an interesting issue, because what this tribune is doing is he's putting together 470 Roman soldiers to guard one prisoner. That seems a little bit of overkill. Yes, there were 40-some Jews who said they had taken a vow to murder Paul, but 470 Roman soldiers, men who were well trained in how to kill, men who had all kinds of abilities. And notice that it says there's 200 soldiers, along with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen. Now, the 70 horsemen would be enough in anybody's mind to deter some Jews. But he also, along with the 200 soldiers, sent 200 spearmen. So normally Jews would not have any way to stand opposed to spearmen. They have an awfully dangerous weapon to use to keep a normal crowd at bay. The 200 soldiers would have swords and would have shields that they would have. Much like you would see riot police today, these would be the guys that would push a riot back, who would divide the people, and then the spearmen would come in and finish off anything that the soldiers could not take care of. So we have 470 Roman soldiers, some on horseback, some with spears, some with shields and swords, and they are going to take Paul out of Jerusalem to Caesarea, which is a good 60 miles away. That's quite a distance. It's to the northwest. It's taking him out of the center of the country and moving him over to the seashore and up away from Jerusalem. So 60 miles. And he says, I want you to take him at the third hour of the night. Typically, this would mean about 9 p.m. is when they're going to leave. Now, there's a little bit to understand about the desire to take Paul at 9 o'clock at night along the road. You see, most Jews would not do anything after sunset. They would be at home. Their culture was such that you would not attempt to do any work or anything else after sunset. And so his assumption is that these 40 men who have vowed to kill Paul would be at home. They would not be out after sunset. And besides, they were anticipating ambushing Paul the next morning. So the tribune is going to do something out of the ordinary. He's going to send his men by night out to Caesarea. And again, it's a 60-mile trip. Now, what's real interesting is that we are told that they went as far as Antipatris in verse 31. That is 35 miles from Jerusalem, and it is the midway point of a town between Jerusalem and Caesarea. Now, think about that. They got there on the next day, which means that they marched all night to get Paul that 35 miles. That's quite a trek for Roman soldiers. They were moving at a very good clip. And there's really no way that those 40 Jews, after hearing that Paul maybe left town at 9 o'clock at night with a Roman escort, could have caught up to them. They are not as disciplined and they are not as in good shape as the Romans would have been. The Romans get Paul to Antipatris on the next day. And then it says in verse 32 that on that next day, they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. In other words, after they had gone 35 miles, they determined that they didn't need the 400 soldiers, the 400 with swords and shields, and the 200 with swords and shields, and the 200 spearmen. So those returned back to Jerusalem, probably at a more leisurely pace. But Paul, who had been given a mount, who was on horseback, left with 70 on horseback to move on to Caesarea, which was another 25 miles from Antipatris. And so the main soldiers return to Jerusalem, but the rest of the crowd goes on up to Caesarea, where they deliver the letter from Claudius Lysias to Felix, who is the governor and who is in Caesarea. And they get him up there, and Felix reads the letter to see what's going on and why this man has been sent to him. Now let's go back and talk about the letter for a minute. I kind of skipped over the letter to talk about Paul getting from Jerusalem to Caesarea. And so if we cut back up to verse 26, we see that Claudius Lysias writes to His Excellency, the governor Felix. Now, a couple of things to note here. Lysias is a Greek name, and that most likely is the name that the tribune was born with. And he is a Greek. We knew that from before when he was talking to Paul. And Claudius is most likely his Roman name that he got after purchasing his citizenship. Claudius was the name of the Caesar at the time that he would have purchased his citizenship. And so he takes on a dual name, Claudius Lysias. And so this is the first time that we know his full name. And we see here his Greek roots along with his Roman citizenship have come into play even with his name. And he writes Felix this letter. And this letter is quite interesting because he takes quite a liberty with the events that took place and with the timeline of those events. Let's look at this. He says, this man was seized by the Jews. Now that's true. Paul was seized by the Jews and he was about to be killed by them. That's also true. They were beating Paul and it was their intent to have him killed. But then the truth kind of gets a little bit cloudy here because he says, that's what was happening when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him. Well, he didn't come upon him with the soldiers. It was the centurion that came upon him with soldiers, and the centurions were called out because they heard of a riot going on or starting, and they came down and they found Paul, and they rescued him out of the midst of the Jewish crowd that was beating him. But let's go on. Lysias says, and having learned that he was a Roman citizen, and desiring to learn a charge for which they were accusing, I brought him down to their council. Having learned that he was a Roman citizen. He didn't go to rescue him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen, but that is kind of how the letter's written and lets you think that that was what he was doing. He's painting himself in a very good light for the governor. He wants it known that he found a Roman citizen being beat by Jews, and he rescued him and brought him and took him then to the council to find out what the charges were. And when I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment, and then I found out that it was disclosed to me that they had a plot against him, I sent him at once to you, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. Claudius Lysias paints himself in the very best of light for Felix. He changes the issues a little bit, the timeline a little bit. He never makes mention of the fact that he bound a Roman citizen. He never makes mention of the fact that he was about to flog a Roman citizen. And that it was only when Paul said something to the centurion that he was a Roman citizen and the centurion got nervous that the tribune learned that Paul was a Roman citizen. All those facts are left out. I don't know what he's thinking because at some point in time, if Felix actually talks to the centurion and talks to Paul, he might find out the truth of the timeline. But Claudius Lysias takes his best shot at repainting the timeline and painting himself to look more like a rescuer of a Roman citizen than someone who made the mistake of binding one and almost flogging that one. Now, it is true that when he found out about the plot to kill Paul, that he immediately took action to have Paul sent up to Felix. And it is true that he told the council that they had to go up to Felix to Caesarea to also state what they were holding against Paul. Those facts are true, and those facts are going to be played out. But it's just interesting that what's going on here is a political situation. Claudius Lysias is making the best opportunity for himself, painting himself in the best light for Felix, the governor, as he's going to come up there. Now, one thing I want to point out to you is that Felix was not necessarily the best governor in that time frame. Felix, as we learned from some historians, was actually a very poor governor. Felix was not someone that was well spoken of. He became governor because of his brother Pallas. And Pallas had excellent political connections. And also Felix had married Drusilla, the sister of Herod Agrippa II, the Herod Agrippa that will be mentioned in chapter 25. And Felix was appointed not because he was a good governor, but because he had political connections. As a matter of fact, he was considered by the historian Tacitus, who's a Roman historian, to be regarded as a very poor governor. It says he exercised the power of a king, but with the mind of a slave. That was a derisive thing written about him as the governor. It's also a fact that he was a poor governor and that the Jews revolted often under his administration. They were not fans of Felix. Most of the Roman soldiers were not fans of Felix. Even other governors in other provinces were not fans of Felix. And he was painted in a very poor light by Roman historians as well as by Jewish historians. Now that's just a small fact I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we go on to chapter 24 and talk a little bit about what's going on here and what happens. Now I'm going to stop this lesson right here. It's a short one. We're only about 18, 19 minutes into this lesson. Normally I do about 30 minutes, but I'm going to cut this short mainly because I'm at church and I'm kind of watching over the homeless today, and I need to go check on them. But watch this one. If I happen to get chapter 24 recorded and sent to you, we may delve into it on Thursday night. If not, we'll just stop right here. I enjoy the time that we spend together. I enjoy talking about these lessons. I hope you do as well. But right now, we'll stop. We've finished all of chapter 23, and we're getting ready to go on to 24 in the next lesson. God bless. I'll see you soon. Goodbye.